Okay, good morning everybody. I'm Steve Hughes, I'm the Head of Economic and Social Policy at Policy Exchange. First thing to note is that Kamal Ahmed could unfortunately not make it this morning. He had to deal with rather a large business story that broke yesterday, and he had to head back to London, so that's why I'm here, and I'm in an unorthodox position of having to chair an event and also speak at it as well, so I'm going to have to introduce myself, which will be interesting. David Lammy is currently winging his way here in a taxi, so he'll be here within the next 5 or 10 minutes, but he told us to get cracking with what we're doing so we can make a start, and then he'll join us when he arrives. The topic we're talking about today is how can UK Plc innovate to help Britain win the global race. And on the panel to my left we have Maggie Philbin, who's got a long history in the media and did chair the Independent Digital Task Force, which she was asked to do by Miliband. And she currently presents Bang Goes the Theory on BBC One as well. To my right is Adrian, who's the co-founder of the digital entertainment service blinkbox, which was sold to Tesco in 2011, I believe. And previously Adrian was at Vodafone as well, so lots of interesting tech stories to talk about there. What we're going to do is we're going to do 5 or 7 minutes each, and then a Q&A at the end. So we're going to start with Maggie.
Okay. I have deep affection for this town, a real connection with it. I was born here, left it when I was 4 years old, came back to university. My daughter came to university here, and she's one of that very rare breed because she works in the software industry, and this is a very crucial week because apparently if she lands the deals that she's expecting to land this week, she is going to be the top person in BNC, which is a major American company in terms of sales. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed for her. She's very excited about that. As you can gather, I'm incredibly proud of what she's done. She's done what she's done despite me, rather than because of me, because like many parents, I was really delighted when Rose was here and talking about going to do law. I thought, my goodness me, my daughter is going to do law. And one of the things that our rather lengthy report, we only actually printed the executive summary because the report was so long, but of course it's well worth consulting online, was that this whole area of perception, the perception of opportunity within the digital space really needs to be addressed. Because at the moment, young people, their parents, their teachers have no deep understanding of the opportunity. And if you don't understand what the opportunities are, you're not going to be particularly motivated to make sure that you develop the right skills. If UK Plc is to win the race to the top, they need people with the right skills. And they also need people with the right attitude. And one of the things that our report looks at is, well, are we actually helping people of all ages to gain those skills? Because it's not just about people within the formal education system, it's about people who are currently running small businesses, maybe charities, and you would be staggered at the number of small businesses who not only don't have a website, over 50% don't have a website, but the ones that do don't have the ability to carry out transactions on their website. You know, they are always going to have this almost 19th century shopkeeper attitude unless we help them see the advantages. When we were asking for submissions of evidence, Google quoted a satchel company which has started off literally as a kitchen table business with £600, and now that's a multi-million-pound company within an incredibly short period of time. And that's thanks to the ability of the person who ran it to understand how to really commercialise what she was doing. And so rather than selling, 100 satchels a year, she's now selling thousands and thousands and thousands. The whole business about the visibility, I mean, the report looks at everything from what's happening within schools and in particular careers information, which is woeful, what's happening within apprenticeships, because at the moment apprenticeships, if you're particularly, well, actually even if you're a massive company, the whole system is so complicated to negotiate. If you've ever been on the National Apprenticeship website, you'll know what I mean. It's impossible to fathom what you actually need to do, what grants you're entitled to. And we spoke to Accenture, who've set up apprenticeships about 18 months ago, and he said that many times in that process, he thought that if he had been an SME, he would have simply given up because there was just too much. It was just so complicated. We make it very, very hard for the whole system of education to really meet the needs of today. Over, the other hat I wear is CEO of an organisation called TeenTech, so I get to meet a lot of teachers and a lot of young people. And we were running an event in the East End of London. It was a special event for teachers just before we did a big one on the Olympic Park. And as you know, with Tech City, there are a raft of opportunities there for young people. And I'd invited someone to come and talk to these teachers who was setting up something which is now called Here East. And essentially, he was saying, right, within 5 years we will have 6,500 jobs here, and the kind of people we need are, and he listed the kind of technical abilities they would need, the kind of personal abilities that they would need. And afterwards I was chatting to a teacher, and I said, did you enjoy that? And she went, I couldn't really see what it had to do with me. And I thought initially that she was taking the pee, and then I realised, no, she was absolutely serious. Because it wasn't showing her what could she actually do in the classroom to meet the targets that she was set at school. She couldn't see the relevance of all of these opportunities a mile and a half from her school. She genuinely couldn't see it. And so really we need to do things within our education system because teachers are helping their kids jump through hoops, which are not necessarily the right ones, and we're losing this sense of perspective about why we're actually doing all of this. And the other hat I wear is I'm president of the Institute of Engineering Designers, and people have not the faintest idea about what engineering designers actually do and why it's really important and the difference that it can make to the economy. And we've just got to sharpen our act up because there is so much potential. 26 years ago, and I can date it exactly because I was pregnant with my daughter at the time, I stood in front of the satellite dishes at Goon Hilly and proclaimed the dawn of a new digital era. And we really do have the opportunity to make the most of this, but we need to seriously address an education system which is geared towards producing producing people for the empire and to work in factories. And that is just not what the landscape of modern opportunity looks like.
Okay, thanks a lot. Adrian?
So clearly, digital technology is very near to my heart, something I've spent a lot of time doing. And from my perspective, digital technology is critical to driving innovation and the long-term success of Britain. It is changing everything that we do. It is disrupting everything that we do, standard business practices, the way that we live our lives. Everybody has access to information at their fingertips. Clearly, by the audience, you spend more time with your smartphones and your iPads than you do sleeping. But speed and that innovation that provides is now upon us and presents a tremendous amount of opportunity for everybody. It's empowering the next generation. It is so much easier to start a business today than it ever has been. There are so many opportunities to variabilize what were traditional fixed costs, whether that be from administration, finance and reporting, even hosting your services, can all be done at a fraction of the cost historically. So starting a business, and Maggie referred to the I think it's a lady who started the satchel business in her bedroom, is a fantastic example. Anybody can start a business today. Anybody can harness the skills. There is more computing capacity in your smartphones than the Apollo mission in the 60s. So to think about what is there and the opportunities that presents is terribly exciting. Digital technology is also no longer the bastion of digital startups, and new companies such as Google, Facebook or Amazon. Digital technology and the opportunities that it presents are critical for traditional business like Tesco. The more innovation that Tesco can provide in that area, the more successful we're going to be in terms of meeting our customers' needs and changing with their lives. For me, digital technology and the innovation that it provides is actually a nexus of three things. People and skills, access to capital, and then the infrastructure. Infrastructure is not something to be ignored. Many of the population in Britain don't have access to high-speed broadband. I think the ambition of 2 megabits to the home for every person in Britain is simply not enough. If you look at some other countries, particularly in Scandinavia, where broadband is a national right, if we are going to innovate and succeed in digital technology, that is an absolute must. From a Tesco perspective, we've got a long history of investing in digital. We were one of the first to move into grocery home shopping online. We're now one of the market leaders in online digital for grocery. We won the award this year from the grocer in terms of online supermarket of the year. It's something that we're very proud of and very passionate about in terms of helping customers and change with their lives. We've also developed something called the Tesco Labs, which brings together our innovation teams and our technology teams to research, understand, and interact with customers. So much of digital innovation is understanding how the customer will navigate and use things. Jobs and skills such as user interaction design and user experience nobody would have understood what I meant 3 to 5 years ago. Now they're absolutely critical. We've all had that experience where you've tried to use an online grocery app and it doesn't work in the way that you wanted to. You have to go back, you have to go forward, you can't discover. That requires a tremendous amount of trial and error. And bringing those two teams together is really helping us in terms of understanding how we push forward. Tesco's investment in blinkbox is another example. Blinkbox was a small company. It was started by a friend of mine and I nearly 7-8 years ago. I'm dating myself. But we were a very small company. When Tesco bought us 3 years ago, we were still quite small. We only had 20 engineers. And that, in comparison to many of our competitors, was tiny. But we've now gone from 20 engineers to 200 engineers. It's a much, much bigger business. We've been very lucky in the support and investment that Tesco has given us. And we feel very privileged to be able to bring those skills to the broader Tesco environment. There's a tremendous amount of learning that we're able to bring to the bigger environment, bearing in mind we're still a small company versus Tesco in the hundreds of thousands. But in terms of the thinking, the way that we operate, the way that we approach problems, it's been hugely beneficial to us to understand how you can scale. And equally from a Tesco perspective, it's been hugely beneficial on how you might approach some new problems, new challenges, new opportunities that we see. We've grown 250% in the last year. It's a bit like drinking from a fire hose, understanding that growth and coping with that growth, but it is transformative in terms of the way that customers are changing, the way that they interact with us and the sorts of things that they're doing. Another example of innovation is the Huddle, which is Tesco's own tablet. And I think the most amazing thing that we've been able to do is democratize access to technology. Yes, it was price point and it was a low price point, but suddenly 500,000 people have an experience and an opportunity to use a tablet they wouldn't otherwise been able to afford. Many of our competitors offer substantially more expensive tablets. And by allowing customers the opportunity to access, we think that we're stimulating that innovation. We're doing what Maggie referred to in terms of making the sorts of things that you can do with technology much more accessible to everybody. It's a competitive environment, though. And I think the most important thing is making sure that companies in Britain are able to innovate at the same rate as international companies. How we can stimulate the skills, the capital, and that infrastructure will be critical to making sure that we're competitive with the likes of Google, Amazon, Facebook, and others. Otherwise, I think we will run the risk of being overrun by international companies who just simply have been able to scale faster and do the things that we'd like to do quicker and seize the market initiative. Entrepreneurs are critical to this. How we support entrepreneurs, both as business and government, I think is going to be critical. Now, whether that be in the form of providing better infrastructure, which I referred to earlier, improving education, creating digital entrepreneurships for people to experience and understand and operate in environments like blinkbox, to learn and go forward and start their own companies. All of these things are going to be crucial building blocks to get us to where we need to go in terms of the things. And as someone who's grown up in the digital environment, I feel very qualified to be able to tell you that there aren't enough skills. There aren't enough user interaction designers. There aren't enough iPhone developers. There aren't enough Android developers. There aren't enough people who understand how to deliver, and if you know any, can you tell me, deliver high-speed HD quality movies to people's homes right across the country. How you deliver that across a 3G network, let alone a 4G network. And the more that we can do to invest in these people, the more successful that we're going to be. That's it. I haven't got anything else I wanted to say.
Perfect timing, by the way.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Not right. Thank you for that, Adrian. I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of some of the policy exchange work in this area at the moment. I'd urge you all to read a copy of this document, which is our technology manifesto, which has a lot of interesting tech-based proposals in them. And a lot of the issues have actually been covered by the previous two panellists, so I'm not going to dwell on them too much. But I agree with this accessibility point, and I think that's one of the biggest points that we have to recognise in the technological revolution. The very fact that we have 10 million people in the UK that don't have basic digital skills is a bit of a problem. And what I mean by lack of basic digital skills is the fact that they can't send an email or they've never used a search engine. These people will be socially excluded, potentially older people, the more vulnerable in society, and we need to find a way of bringing them into the fold so they can use digital technology and take the advantages that it brings. Now, one of the ways of doing that is doing what the government's done, and essentially introducing computing and coding into the national curriculum. Now, that's not to say that in 20 years' time we'll just have this army of people who are going to be building apps and being the next digital millionaires. That's not the case. It's about providing the skills that are necessary and the flexible skills that are necessary in a modern economy, because this is the way that the economy is going. Now, in terms of the skills, providing the infrastructure, we've talked about broadband speeds and everything associated with it. The state does have a role to play in that, and making sure the coverage of broadband, for example, is across the country and there's not just pockets of it. Because another area of exclusion is the fact that we have this big magnet, which is London and the South East, and various points around cities. But the fact that we do have this ability to build businesses within bedrooms now is important, and we need to use government as an enabler to allow as many people to do that as possible. So once we have the skills and once we have the infrastructure, well, what happens then within what politicians call the global race, which is just a proxy for globalisation and the increased marketisation of the world, and increasing consumer markets that British companies will have access to and can sell into, with increased demand for products and services that British businesses can produce. How can those businesses compete in that globalised world? And what's the role of the state? Well, the traditional story goes that the majority of our goods and services are sold into mainland Europe. Around 50% of what we produce and export goes to the continent, and these are advanced economies that are facing a lot of problems at the moment. Now, there's very good reasons that we sell into these countries, because the way of doing business is very similar. The geographic proximity is there. There's fewer language barriers, there's fewer regulatory barriers, there's fewer business culture barriers. But we need to work out a way of how to access these high-growth developing nations, the Mexicos, the Chinas, the Indias of the world, to ensure that our businesses have the best chance of making the most of globalisation. Now, the government's got some state-backed organisations that do help businesses in UK Trade and Investment and UK Export Finance. But the question really is whether these organisations do enough, and whether their strategies are good enough to enable businesses to operate within those markets. Now, the first thing I'd say is probably this isn't going to happen overnight. It's not the fact that we're suddenly going to shift the composition of our exports from 50% to Europe to all of a sudden 75% to the rest of the world. This takes an enormous amount of time. And the very fact that our trade outside the European nations goes to Commonwealth countries, it reflects the fact that we've got hundreds of years of history of trade and commerce with these with these countries and nations. So we've got to build the bridges and links to the developing nations now and continue those links for the next 300, 400, 500 years even, to make sure that we're taking advantage of globalisation. And the final thing that I'd say is to enable that as well would be to use better our consulates and embassies around the world for the purposes of trade, because these are involved, they exist in every major city across the world, and they can be used to further the UK's business interests. Other countries do it, so should we, because otherwise we're putting ourselves at a competitive disadvantage. I'll leave it there and pass over to David to say his piece.
Great. I'm sorry that I wasn't here for the beginning of the discussion. Can I just sort of draw on my experience? I don't claim to be a complete expert in this area, but I have been a minister for universities and skills, and a skills minister, and you might have seen a couple of weeks ago that I said I was going to throw my hat into the ring to represent London. So I have been looking at some of these issues in relation to the capital city. The first thing to say is historically, over successive governments, we're not doing terribly well on innovation. The last, in fact, R&D spending fell by 3% last year, and over successive governments, we would have to go back 30 years to see the share of spend in research and development that in the end leads to innovation. And that period of spend in this area was actually under the Wilson government when he was talking about the white heat of technology. So we are a long way from that, and we've got a lot more to do. That does not mean, of course, that we have not got sectors of our economy that are absolutely preeminent in relation to innovation. And I think of parts of the nuclear industry, companies like BAE Systems, and of course a massive and important pharmaceuticals industry that continues to grow. But if we are to remain competitive somehow, we have to be more innovative. And perhaps one of our problems has been a sort of historic paternalism that coming out of the sort of industrial age, which obviously was a massive period of innovation, significant chunks of the population were doing effectively unskilled labour, and certainly in cities like Manchester and much of the north, if we've seen technology go, you've got huge, vast chunks of people that need not just to be looking to be employed, but actually also to be self-employed and to create the companies of the future. I think that's where not just Britain, that's something that plagues a lot of Western democracies. We may well lose a march on places like China and India and Brazil and those emerging economies. So, as I've been looking at this and travelling to other countries, the thing that struck me is we need to get past this idea that products and innovation is something seen beyond our shores. I was in the Brooklyn Naval Dockyard in New York a few months ago, and I was in New York again just 2 weeks ago. There you've got an old, huge 5,000 acre site with 100 different advanced manufacturing companies now based on it. I have to say, it makes Tech City look a very, very small dream indeed. We jump up and down about Tech City. We've got one in London, and actually, if we're going to be really competitive, we should probably have about 10. And then we need to diversify, because it's not just about high tech in that sense. It's also about a whole range of different industries. Green technologies would be one, innovation around distribution. There's a lot more that we need to do. Look at Israel. That's another economy really motoring forward in terms of startup capacity and connectivity, not just in Israel, but to cities like LA and New York, partly because of the ability to harness and use the Jewish diaspora. London is at a huge advantage, as is a city like Manchester, partly because of that previous Commonwealth connection. We can claim to have reach into nearly every country in the world. Those are future markets. A country like Nigeria has a really burgeoning entrepreneurial class that's emerging. How are we harnessing and using that? I don't think we're doing it sufficiently. And then if we get back to significant parts of the UK population that previously were either in low-skilled work or semi-skilled work, but certainly did not have to advance much beyond level 2 skills at school, I think we see that there are still significant issues that we have got to address. In London, 91% of the London economy is actually the service sector. I think that's quite worrying. 21% of that is financial services, obviously hugely important to our country and to that city. But on the whole, financial services, a global industry, is employing very highly skilled people who've done degrees at places like Harvard, Cambridge and MIT, who are arriving from cities like Hong Kong and New York. It's not employing the lion's share of our country. Then you get to the rest of that service economy. You've got public services actually shrinking, and actually whoever was in government, public services at this point would be shrinking to some degree. And the rest of that service economy is largely made up of retail. And that's why we get these proxy debates about a living wage and a minimum wage, because actually that's a sector very important, but it's not, it's got a lot of jobs at the bottom end that are not of high quality. Obviously, when I'm representing an area like Tottenham, I want to see young people not just able to join and be part of a new advanced manufacturing that potentially is coming back to our country, but able also to innovate themselves. And so how we support our own to be entrepreneurial, I think, is a big dimension to this emerging story, and I think there's considerably more to do. I lament particularly the loss of night schools. An old idea, but a great idea. And the idea is basically that working people can work during the day, but potentially skill up, learn a new skill or a trade in the evening. And I think of previous decades in which, where we were building a professional class in this country after the war, and people were doing accountancy and bookkeeping, and actually the new jobs that would create that service economy, the ability to do that in the evening. And I think in a city like Manchester, if you do want to be at the cutting edge of innovation, if you do want to have those IT skills that might enable you to innovate into markets in China, India or Brazil, where are you going to do that? And how are you going to do that? Other than by going to university to do a 3-year degree at £9,000 a year, and how the hell are you going to do that if you're 35 or 40? So our infrastructure actually isn't there for everyday people beyond the age of 21 to actually participate in this new economy. And again, I was worried, frankly, that in cities like New York, Chicago, you can do that still. you can work during the day and you can participate in potentially the new economy as it emerges going down the line. So I think that if you like, the government leaning on Kenneth Baker and coming up with a new generation of technical level colleges is absolutely in the right direction. But I worry that quite a lot of the emphasis has been on young people, and actually the mainstay of any economy are a little bit older than 18 to 21. The mainstay of the economy are those who are currently working and are actually into their 30s and 40s, and you're wanting them to continue those skills and access those new possibilities. None of this is possible in the end if there is not significant, considerable high-speed broadband. And I have to say, Britain is way behind the curve just on the ability to access high-speed broadband. I've spent a lot of the time at this conference sort of hanging out of windows and holding my phone up to try and get 3G, just to find out what various members of the shadow cabinet have said. So there's something slightly weird in a sense about talking about innovation when there are serious issues on broadband. And again, we are beneath several Eastern European countries in relation to access, connectivity, and high-speed broadband. It has been slow. You cannot, given that we've got a new freelance economy, that the nature of technology means that much of this actually can be done at home. We do have to take seriously the basic furniture that allows you to be the innovative country that we know we need. So I'm glad that we ring-fenced the science budget. This government continued to ring-fence the science budget, but we ought to be alarmed that actually R&D spending is still falling. We're not back to levels that we had 30 years ago. I think there's some architecture that fundamental actually that we really got to get on with. This is not to say, of course, that we haven't got huge strengths in some sectors like pharmaceuticals and huge capacity in our country, but the sort of dynamism you're seeing in economies like Israel's and the sorts of ways in which big cities like this need to be reaching deeper into more of their population is not yet there in the British economy. And I think that there's not, there's been some complacency, and I would put that over successive governments.
Okay, great. So before we go to some questions from the floor, I've got a question myself, which is, we've talked a lot about young people's engagement with innovation and digital skills and everything like that. And I wondered what the panel's views were on how that engagement has changed since the onset of the financial crisis. So I think we've all mentioned areas of the world which potentially have greater technological bases than we do, or greater ability within technology than we do in the UK. But pre-2007, you could have said, well, we have the preeminent financial system in the world based in London, and look, isn't it clever, it's innovating with mortgage-backed securities and doing really well. Has the fact that financial crisis came along and changed perceptions of the financial service industries now mean that people are going to universities and potentially going into tech-based jobs rather than finance-based jobs, or does it make any difference? Do you want to start with that, Maggie?
Well, if you talk to any tech company, they'll bemoan the fact that they can't find the right kind of people. So, I mean, there's two sides to this question. It's whether or not, and if we're talking about young people, whether they are aware of the opportunities. It's like we all carry these. But actually, if I'm honest, if I asked, I'm probably going to come severely unstuck here, but it's like, if I asked most people in this room, right, to say, right, okay, just tell me, there are hundreds of people involved in making this possible. Like, do you have an idea of all the job descriptions, the kind of salary levels, the sort of opportunities? Wouldn't be able to do it, And so we expect teachers to be able to do this, it's unfair. And so the responsibility goes to companies to make the opportunities really visible and really, really obvious. the other thing, I think, is that in terms of innovation, you need risk takers. And if you look at what happens within education, a lot of it is about encouraging young people to take what I would describe as a safe chartered course, rather than to steer off that and be sort of bold, brave and intelligent and perhaps fail a few times, you know. And with the pressure on sort of passing exams, it's been really important. You know, I mean, standards obviously are important, but I think we're kind of like missing a trick. And you'll always have to control me because I go wildly off the point. But the other thing, you know, we were talking about the need to innovate, and yes, obviously it's really important. We need to be able to innovate. But we need to be able to commercialise those innovations. I mean, if you walk into the main conference hall, there's a wonderful stand there that celebrates University of Manchester and, you know, home of graphene. And obviously that is amazing. However, this is is it the biggest university in Europe now? You just think about all of the innovations which have not been developed from this university for one reason or another. You know, and it's things like that which I think are really sort of like, you know, frustrating the whole picture. And students don't necessarily have, you know, I mean, we've sort of seen it in the report, even in sort of within computer science, because yes, there are the technical skills, but there are this raft of other skills and abilities which we don't seem to be designing. If you talk to people, like, and I'm sure it applies within Tesco, certainly within Network Rail, what they'll say is, actually, do you know what, I can find programmers. What I need are clever, really clever thinkers, people who are great communicators, because if we look at things like where massive IT programs have gone wrong, let's say like within the NHS, it's because the conversations that were had about those programs were not good. And so we need people who can have the right kind of conversations, right? Yeah, you do have to control me because I don't want to go away. Okay, but I think I threw a few ideas out there about why I think that the picture isn't quite as rosy as we'd like it to be.
Okay, Adrian, do you?
I actually think that the financial crisis was a good thing for entrepreneurialism. I think at least the graduates that we talk to that come to see us at Blinkbox and Tesco, you know, are so much more excited about trying to do something for themselves. They're not content with the well-trodden path of getting a good university degree or graduating from high school and going to a bank. That for them is no longer aspirational. Aspirational now is the opportunities that are presented in their hands, the sorts of things that they can see and do with their smartphones, the games that they can create, the songs that they can create, the businesses that they can create. And if you talk about the comment I made earlier in terms of it's never been easier to start a business, I think we need to do a lot more to encourage it. I think helping people and helping them understand how you harness all of the elements of what is required to start a business or work in that sort of environment, it would serve to foster innovation faster. But I think, you know, at least when I was growing up, you know, in the 90s, it was a very aspirational career to become a banker because you got paid lots of money. It's no longer like that. Yeah. And I think people are a lot more enamored with doing something for themselves, which I think is a great thing.
I think there's a few things. I think that Britain has got a lot better over the last 10 to 15 years on some of the basics. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics, all of those courses have seen growth at university. A lot of emphasis from this government and the previous one in those areas. There are a lot more young people doing advanced maths, and that's very important. Where I think we've been less good is areas like coding. Google have got a good scheme now to get coding into primary schools, but it's not nearly at the sort of quantity that you would sort of need and expect. And so how our computers work, not just how you use a computer, is still something that I think your average young person hasn't got you know, an idea about. And then I think that whilst we remain a fantastic place for basic academic skills, and we remain a fantastic country for people arriving across the world and wanting to be part of the fabric of what we do. I don't think that we're the best place for vocational skills, and I think any engineer would say that there's a lot more in Britain to do. In fact, it's still the case that because there's a lot of noise from very sort of sexy brands and companies. I mean, I could describe Tesco's as sexy, but I'm thinking of companies like Nike and McDonald's and companies like that. Actually, it's still the case, I think, for the average young person, when they think of engineering, they think of quite a dirty industry, old style. They're not thinking of the clean, innovative places that I would certainly associate with modern engineering, and there has been some fragmentation in that community in terms of conveying all that is on offer and possible, if you like, to our young people. So there's probably still a bit more to do there. Okay. Actually, one idea I think that because we've got such fantastic universities, and because we've got young people all across the world arriving here to do masters and PhDs in the sorts of subjects that absolutely are at the centre of innovation, we really ought to be trying to keep those young people. And a visa regime that says don't go back to Hong Kong or China or India, stay in Britain, is mandatory. We are competing with Australia, America, Japan. At the moment, our tendency is to want to kick those young people out. It's barking.
Yeah, and that's something that we included in this manifesto as well, about the visa issues. If we could take questions now, and if you could tell us where you're from and who you are before you ask the question, and keep it to topic, that'd be great. So start over here, perhaps.
Jo Valentine, Chief Executive of London First. Just a few bits and pieces. One, David Birkbeck does evening classes.
Birkbeck and City Lit. But they're two institutions, is the point. It's quite small.
But two questions, because there's been a lot of focus on skills. We run the largest jobs and careers fair, I think, in the UK, 35,000 youngsters coming through, 35,000 jobs and apprenticeships on offer. Can we get tech companies to come and exhibit there? No. So a question to Adrian. Can you talk to some tech people? Could you have a look at Skills London? Could you come and excite those 35,000 15 to 25-year-olds from London that come through? We bus in the schools, so for every single borough in London has children coming into it. So is there anything we can do about that? And David, when you're Mayor of London, could you get super fast broadband for all the business areas sorted?
We should have it before then.
No, it's not that simple, I think, David. A little bit expensive and a bit of infrastructure to sort, but could you sort it by the time you finish?
So I'm sure we can look into it. I can't profess to know the topic in detail, but I'm sure we can look into it. Is there a reason why you feel that you haven't been able to get tech companies?
We talk to the tech companies, they just don't want to come along, and they buy a stand just like anybody else. I'm not directly talking to the tech companies, but other people come. So McDonald's is there, you mentioned. PwC is there. A whole range of. There's a huge range of companies. So it's just the tech. It's slightly irritating to hear tech companies complaining that they can't get skills people, and then they don't bother to turn up at the biggest careers fair in the UK.
Oh, these are.
So I'm happy to talk offline about it.
We run TeenTech, and we have an event on the Olympic Park, and we have engaged well with tech companies. I think sometimes it is slightly on both sides, and just for the tech companies to understand the effect they can have on those young people and how powerful it is, and we did some measurements, so we bring it's sort of 50 schools from across London into this thing, and particularly on the girls. So at the beginning of the day, 22% think that perhaps a career in tech or engineering might be for them. By the end of the day, 71% feel that way, and that's just because they have seen living, breathing examples of what it actually might mean, and they understand how massive the technology industries actually are, and that they aren't particularly what they think that they are. So whether it is, the one thing that's quite sort of striking, we had a company who are responsible for sort of building, designing and building artificial limbs, and we had an Olympic athlete there, and the kids fitted his leg, and they kind of understood the engineering, the design, the technology, and that probably, if you said technology to a kid, would not perhaps have been the first thing that sprung into their mind. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely endorse that. It is really
Can we work with TeenTech to get the tech companies then?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's at Excel, so
yeah.
I think the other point to make, which is very important, we've talked a lot about digital skills being engineering and coding. There are so many other skills required to put a company like blinkbox together. And I think people ignore the fact that user interaction design is an absolutely critical skill. It wasn't around 10 years ago in the same way it is now, and you can build all the great tech you like. If people can't use it, they're not going to bother. Design, the color scheme, the touch, the feel, those sorts of things. I mean, Apple has made millions and millions of dollars in designing the products that they do, and making them eye-catching and simple and easy to use. Again, you can make any product you like. If it doesn't look and feel good, customers aren't going to use it. Product management is a discipline in of itself. What are the requirements? What do you actually want this thing to do? It's all very well that I might say to an engineer, I want people to listen to high definition music on their phone. What does that mean? How is that a brief to someone to go away and build it? And that is a real discipline in of itself. Project management, absolutely critical. Delivering on time, on budget, and pulling all the different bits and pieces of the team together. And then from a financial perspective, when we talk about the demise of the decline of the financial services industry, every business has eventually got to make money. And understanding the levers of how you put the different elements together, how you're going to scale the business, what are the economics, what's the addressable market opportunity, those sorts of things are absolutely critical. So in the skills sources that I was referring to, much as I was quipping that, if you can find someone that can help me deliver high speed, high definition to the television, I'd really like to meet them. All the other elements are absolutely critical. And we talk a lot about apprenticeships and opening our eyes, or opening young people's eyes to the depth and breadth of what is required, and the process required to get any of these products to market, I think, is absolutely critical.
Okay. Further questions?
Nicola Hannam, the Science Council. I agree that we need more people to take skills, and it's great that it's starting to come to schools, but who's going to deliver that education? Whereas the workforce that actually has those skills themselves to be able to pass that on to the new generation. And I'm surprised in talking about night schools, that seems a very low-tech solution to a high-tech problem. Is there not some way we can do this through online education? Should we not be investing in that instead?
Well, I don't think it has to be low level. I think, I don't think evening schools and the ability, because unless you think that the workforce should just come between 18 and 21, you have to think of ways in which adults can actually participate in the new economy.
Because they have to physically be there to do that.
So then you get into what is convenient for them, and that's why the issue of weekends and evenings becomes so important. And I think there is some evidence that whilst we've got some fantastic courses at universities, both cost and time is prohibitive. You're absolutely right. Online is a key dimension. I suppose when I say night schools, when I was in New York, there are some fantastic online courses. They're actually quite expensive to run. They still need people behind them. Some of this is not actually completely conducive to just online education. Of course, we've got great institutions like the Open University. I don't know, though, to what degree they see all of this area as theirs. I'm not sure about that when I recall the sort of conversations that I've had with them. So that's what I mean about the architecture, really. I don't know if we've quite gripped the architecture in terms of education as best as we could. Your point about the workforce is very well made, very well made. But I guess that the investment that we've made, that we have genuinely made in STEM, must be feeding through. So I think that we must have a workforce of younger teachers who have got the fundamentals in these areas. Whether they've got the innovative fundamentals on top of, say, the advanced mathematics, I can't say, because actually what you need is models of practice that mean that people are both teachers and in industry. But if you think about it, if you sort of think back to the old style kind of technical colleges, Polytechnic, there you had a strata of teachers that were working as well. That's less likely, frankly, in a sort of Ivy League university, in fact. So that's why I think that sort of technical level college can be quite important.
Maggie, you want to?
Yeah. Again, a number of things. When it comes to simply like the teachers within schools, I think it's high time, really, that we rewarded teachers in a slightly different way. Because at the moment, if you are, say, a PhD student and you are absolutely on top of whether it's computing or physics or whatever, you're making a decision about what am I going to do. At the moment, if you say, I'm going to teach, there's a lot of kind of, oh gosh, I'm not good at teaching, are you? Why would you want to do that? And it's because the image of a teacher has really changed, and we need to treat them like the real amazing professionals they are, and there need to be almost like a progression route which doesn't involve them having to become a deputy head and go into administration, which many of them don't want to do, so that it's seen as a profession that you can really progress in and be something you want to do, and then that will attract people who have got those much needed knowledge in subject areas that we know that we need young people to to have the advantage of really inspiring and knowledgeable teachers. I mean, with things like MOOCs, I think at the moment there's quite a lot of evidence to show that if you've already got a degree, you're more likely to do a MOOC, and that in terms of the number of people who actually complete courses, the completion rate on things like that is quite low, and so I think that I think we need to get perhaps a little bit more cleverer in terms of the pedagogy about how we make the most of online resources, which are amazing. So I think that there is progression that could be made in that area too.
Okay, just we've got a little bit more time for a couple more questions. So I think the gentleman there, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to, my name's Patrick, I work at the Chartered Management Institute. I wanted to pick up on the point that Maggie made, I think, about the lack of conversion rate, the low conversion rate of innovation, commercialisation of other innovations. And one of the things that's sometimes been talked about as the missing piece in that picture is kind of the management skills that come into it, is what Angus Lang at Loughborough has called STEM with two M's, STEM with management on the end, which I think is quite neat. But how do we, one of the things that we've done, we did some work with the Association of Business Schools and looked at the need to, one of the things, recommendations that we came up was to integrate business and management courses, modules, into degrees of all sorts, so that students who were doing technical or design or fashion subjects would also have that business kind of management element to it. I'm interested in what the panel thinks about that and what are the other routes that we can go down to improve that commercialisation.
Maybe we could start with Adrian on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the comment I was making earlier. It's all very well to talk about the very brilliant people who write the code, but commercialising the product and bringing it to market is absolutely critical. I would wholeheartedly concur.
Yeah.
Teaching people not only how to be brilliant at a chosen domain, whether that be science, technology, mathematics, whatever the case may be, but also what that means to then put into practicalities as a business is critical. Sadly, no business can survive not making any money. And I think understanding that and approaching things commercially and how they can be turned into a business and commercialized in the future is absolutely critical. How we do that, bigger question. Building it into the curriculum is one way. Providing people with exposure, I think, is another way. How we ensure that everybody understands the bits and pieces, not just the glamorous or unglamorous parts, I think is absolutely critical.
Okay, David?
I think the management point is a good one. It's not one that is my expertise. When I was responsible for intellectual property and before being an MP, I used to do intellectual property law. There was quite a lot of discussion of our intellectual property regime in this country not being entirely conducive to the innovator wanting to start up their new company. And there was a sense in which actually, if you're in the US, the can-do nature of their intellectual property regime in a state like California actually allowed the Googles to emerge, the Googles, the Yahoos, the companies that we now look to. And frankly, that would have been impossible over here because you would have had very quickly, both in copyright and in patents, a sense that you couldn't do it because that property lay with someone else. I don't know to what extent that has changed or whether that view has solidified, but obviously it's quite important that for old economies like ours, you actually allow the space to bring that new innovation to market. There is this sense that Britain has the design. We have some of the best architecture schools in the world. So we're often behind much of the world's great design. And indeed, we've had the brain power to innovate. We invented the World Wide Web, but we didn't commercialize it, which was a huge error. And it's the old joke. Fish and chips are great, but it's funny that they're not sold quite around the world like burgers and fries. So it may be that there may well be management issues, but there may also be legal issues about the, and if you like, old industry issues stopping the space to actually bring that product to market. And that's the synergy that often comes out of universities, innovating with the ideas, but often not commercializing those in the right way. It may also be that we're a very global nation, often very generous in supporting the rest of the world to innovate, and not so good at. I worry that much of our higher education, and if you speak to our vice chancellors, they're so keen on setting up a campus in China or India or innovating on behalf of global Britain, but not quite talking with the same passion about their own sort of domestic product. Okay.
I'll just come in very, very quickly on that. I think it's an interesting point that adding management, because one of the issues, very well known, is that companies get to a certain size and for whatever reason people feel quite nervous about taking them further. It's quite comfortable with, whether it's your comfort level is 5 employees or 10 or 20. And in fact, the more for certain leaders of companies, as you grow, the risk becomes greater because you've got more you feel you've got more to lose. And that's interesting because it could well be that if we had a deeper understanding of how to manage companies, we'd be more comfortable about scaling them because you would understand how to do it, and the risk would seem worthwhile.
We've run out of time there, I'm afraid, so if we could just show our thanks to our panellists, Maggie, David and Adrian.